Hello, this is Stephen Gorard. I'm talking about conducting educational research in this series of videos. And today I was going to talk a little bit about the use of data that already exists, also known as secondary data. There's a chapter in the corresponding book that covers this in more detail. But I want to just talk about the idea first of all. So imagine, imagine you watching this video and how you may have traveled to work or school or university, or the clothes you wore or the food you ate this morning before going. And in each of these cases, you will have not made the clothes, you won't have built the bus or built the railway that took you to work. Um, you won't have grown the food that you ate or created it in a factory. What you've done is simply bought these things. You'll have bought a ticket, you'll have bought the clothes, you'll have bought the food, as you do with almost everything else in life. And why do you do that? Because if you were to do it yourself, it would take you a lot longer. Imagine trying to grow the food or build the transport or build a car. It would take ages. The result wouldn't be as good as what you can buy immediately, and it would be more expensive. So it would take you longer and cost you more for a worse product. So we tend to go with stuff which has already been produced, which is better for us in that respect. Now, I'm not arguing whether we should or shouldn't. What I want to do is draw an analogy with what we do when we do research. When you do research on any topic, there will be data sets that already exist that will tell you at least something of the answer to your research questions. And it would be absurd not to have a look at them and decide how much they can help you. Data that already exists will be quicker. There are data sets on almost anything that you want to research, which you could download this afternoon in 10 minutes or whatever, and you could do it. You could be doing your analysis very quickly. There have been cases where people have downloaded a data set, done some analysis, and then written a report of that all in one day or in one afternoon. These data sets are free, largely, so they don't cost you anything. The data is already there, so it's really quick. It's already been coded for you, so that you don't have to do any further conversion. It's generally ready to analyze. You'll have to do a bit of cleaning, but basically it's there for you. And of course, it's going to be of higher quality than you can expect to collect yourself. And we'll look at some examples in a minute of what kind of data there is. But let's say, for the sake of argument, if someone was coming to tell you about what percentage of children in the school in England or schools in England had a disability or a special educational need, and they showed you the figures which came from the annual school census, which is required by law for all schools to complete every year. So they'd say, among the 8 million children at school, this is the number of children who are registered with special needs or a disability. That's going to be more convincing to you than somebody who's done a survey of a number of schools. Even if they'd done 100 schools or got 10,000 students, it's not going to be as convincing or as authoritative as the official data. So for all of the reasons I suggested and many, many more, I would really urge you, when you're doing research, to look at what data already exists that could help you to do your research. Now, of course, there may be all sorts of slight disadvantages in using existing data. For example, you won't be able to take the field notes that you might be able to take when you are collecting your own data, and you've missed that opportunity. So you've lost maybe some of the detail, some of the depth that you would otherwise have. And of course, you're using data which was collected by somebody else for another purpose. And you have to be appropriately skeptical about what that purpose was and how accurate the data is. So in the example I talked about, the annual school census, I don't think there's any particular problem. It doesn't mean that the data is perfect. It doesn't mean that every single case is recorded or that every single registration of a child with special needs is accurate. but that's just normal in real life. There's no particular political or financial motive in collecting the data other than to get information. So I would probably trust that information, whereas with perhaps some other data sets, I'd be less willing to trust it. And that's a judgment you have to make. Okay. You can be very creative with secondary data. You know, one of the obvious things to do would be to link together 2 or more data sets with an idea that you have for a piece of research, and use the linked data to answer a question that maybe hasn't been asked before. And that can be very exciting. Even though the data exists, your research can be very original. Okay, I've recently done something which is not particularly original, but was very interesting and very simple, which was to link the school census with the school workforce census. So this is a data set about the students who are at school in all the schools in England, and a data set about all the teachers who are teaching at schools in England. And you can link them together at school level to see to what extent are the teacher characteristics linked to the characteristics of the school or the students that they work with. So I was interested, for example, in the ethnic origin of teachers and students. And we published a paper which showed quite clearly that the number of ethnic minority teachers was far less than the same proportion of ethnic minority students in England, and that this might cause some problems. Now, the analysis is really simple. I mean, the data was there. We had to put it together, link the 2 data sets. But the kind of arithmetic involved in working out the proportion of, for example, white British teachers and the proportion of white British students in England is kind of primary school level. Anybody would be able to do it. And although there are large numbers involved, there's a huge data set, actually the analysis doesn't take very long. So it's the kind of thing that somebody could do as a master's thesis, for example, and could probably get it published. And we got it published, and newspapers started reporting our findings and things like that. It caused a bit of a flurry at the time, and that's quite interesting. But as I say, it was such a simple project that a master's student could do it, an undergraduate student could do it, and it would be more powerful, more important, more significant than almost anything that other dissertations would achieve if you were trying to collect your own data. So I'm trying to persuade you that it is a way forward. It's easy and it's powerful, and people will take you seriously, because if you're saying this is what's actually happening with these data sets, you should be aware there are a whole range of different data sets. It's not just numeric data of the kind I've mentioned before, or population census data. A number of resources. I know that there's a library at New York University, and online they have selections of things like videos. I mean, hundreds of videos of teachers teaching lessons, perhaps in physics. And if you wanted to do something like look at teaching styles or the attention of students in classes and so on, rather than doing your own observations, or in addition to doing your own observations, you could reanalyze those videos. They're there sitting waiting for you to do it. The world has got full of data that already exists, and it grows all the time. In the UK, if you get funded by the government sort of research councils to do research, when you've finished, you're required by the rules of the finance to lodge your data sets, any data you've created, with the UK Data Archive. So that simply builds an archive of data. So that every day, in every way, there are more and more data sets of different kinds that you can use. What kind of data sets are there? Obviously, I don't know. I can't possibly list all of them here, but you should probably be aware that the OECD, the international organization, organizes the PISA surveys, where 15-year-old students around the world answer questions about themselves, their school, their families, their home life, and they take tests in maths, English, and science. And there are other international surveys of a similar kind, like the Third International Maths and Science Survey, and PEARLS and so on, which is for primary school children. there is a survey of teachers, TALIS, TALIS, which is linked to the PISA data set. So you can actually link the teachers and the students in the same study. And that's a really interesting one. And the European Union, as to take another example, has a whole range of data sets, but the most obvious one is Eurostat, and it has information about the intakes, the students, the outcomes, the unfairness, and so on in all of the countries of the EU and beyond. And I've already mentioned stuff in America. In one of the best data sets I've ever seen is from Chile, where they have something which is like the annual school census or the National Pupil Database in England, but it contains so much more than factual stuff about characteristics and exam attainment. It contains information about motivation, about family background, occupation, income, and things like that. It's a real one-stop shop for people who are interested in work in Chile. Other countries have similar resources. Stuff that I've been involved in helping people with recently has come from China. Now, China doesn't have or doesn't release much official statistics about education. They don't have the equivalent of a national pupil database, but some universities have got together to create recurrent surveys or waves of cohort studies, CFPS, CEPS, and so on, which contain rich data about the students and their progress and their background. So wherever you look, you're going to find that kind of information. In England, the government has a website called Get Information About Schools. You can find a whole range of information about each individual school in the country or collectively. There's data on higher education, on applications to higher education, on jobs that people get after higher education, and data sets like longitudinal educational outcomes, or LEO, that puts all of that together. So my point to you is there's just a treasure trove of existing data. And before you start collecting your own tiny little study, why don't you have a look at what's out there and think, if I'm imaginative and I can think of a question that somebody has not yet answered with this data, I can do a really powerful study, and I can do it, cheaply, efficiently, quickly. Okay, thank you.